Indie film is dead. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I'm an indie filmmaker. I've made 5 feature films that I would classify as indie films. I've been working on a bunch of indie films as of lately, and I still really like making indie films. But I think that the indie film market, especially how we distribute, promote, and get our films just out there, is a broken system. And I like to talk about it and how I feel like we can fix this system. In order to diagnose this problem, we need to look at the source, the part of the problem that really got us here, which is the 90s. If we look at the 90s, you'll see a bunch of people like Richard Linklater, Robert Rodriguez, and Kevin Smith. They've been hailed as heroes of the indie filmmaking experience, and the dream is that if you play your cards right, you'll make a film, you'll get it into a festival, it'll become a festival darling, you'll get a deal with some big company, and then you'll ride the wave. And over the last 20 or 30 years, there has been a bunch of films that have done that for certain directors. But if you look at this long list, you'll see maybe 10, 15, 20 names. Some of them are complete unconnected people who are just not connected at all. Some of them are, the nephews, grandsons, or relatives of famous or well-connected people. So you have a mixed bag of people who have made it in the industry based on zero connections, and then you have a lot of the indie darling successes that come out of nowhere but have been connected in the industry for many years. The problem that these stories promote is this idea that if you just show your film to the right one person, it'll blow up, it'll get $1 million put towards it, and then it will get distributed by a big company. This is just a story that is basically the equivalent to gambling or maybe buying a lottery ticket. You have about the same level of success in terms of trying to win big on these deals, because oftentimes you need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to just make a film of that level of quality that you could even be considered. The only story that I've really seen in the last few years that even comes close to an indie success is the story of Jim Cummings with Thunder Road. And yet this film was shot on, I believe, either an ARRI or a RED. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for probably the actual film, maybe at the low end $50,000. But a lot of these films are being made for exorbitant amounts of money, and this is not the normal amount of money that an average indie filmmaker can get. You can't just walk out and say, hey, I need $100,000. Not that many people have an uncle that has that much money in disposable cash. So we as a community are fed these stories and told that if you play the game, if you play the system right, you'll make a film and hopefully you'll get your big success when you go to Slamdance, Sundance, Cannes, wherever you need to go. And the problem is that this will lead to what I would call filmmaker burnout. Usually you have someone working really hard for no pay or little pay, crew working for little or no pay, and they spend 3 to 5 years working on their debut feature film that ultimately, while maybe has a lot of interesting and unique qualities to it, just doesn't succeed for a whole host of reasons. Maybe bad sound, bad visuals, bad story. It could be any of these things. But what ends up happening is you have a filmmaker who puts all this effort in, all this time, all this money, and then they are left holding the bag when they don't get into the major, 10, 15 big festivals. So you'll have, I'd say like 75% of all indie filmmakers will quit after this first film. They'll either get into video production, working on weddings, something like that, but they won't end up doing that many films. If you look at a lot of people's IMDb's, you'll see maybe 1, maybe 2 films max, and then they'll quit. After filmmaker burnout, you'll usually get to this point, which is bargaining. You haven't gotten to Sundance, you haven't gotten to Cannes, you don't know what to do. What do I do with my indie film? I don't have any major festivals to premiere it at, so you hit the smaller second-tier festivals. This is where maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't. If you get lucky, you might have a chance at getting maybe small distribution. If not, which you probably aren't going to unless you have something that's really stand out, then you're in this situation where you can either take it to local festivals just to premiere it and potentially get connections, or you are now deciding whether or not you should make DVD sales, put it on the internet, put it on Tubi, Amazon, YouTube, any of these platforms. And when you're in this part where you start off thinking you're going to Cannes, and then you end up putting your film on one of these platforms, it seems like a major downgrade. I think that most indie filmmakers, at least going into this mindset, would consider that a downgrade. It's like, okay, you're going from this giant prestige festival to putting it on the internet for free or cheap, and most people aren't going to be able to see it as a prestige film. Finally, you'll see these indie filmmakers end up putting their films out there, and what ends up happening is they either don't do enough promotion, don't know how to do promotion, don't know where to promote it, don't know what platforms to get it on, and so their film and their release is bungled because they're trying to release a film that they spent 5 years or 3 years of their life on, and what happens is these films just cannot recoup the budget. If you spent 10, 20, 30, 40 grand on your film, there's no way you're going to recoup your budget on YouTube, Vimeo, Amazon, all these other platforms, because there's just no way right now with how the system is working that you're going to recoup this in a very normal amount of time. So you ended up holding the bag, maybe 20, 30 grand if you really put a lot into your film, and now you're stuck with this film that you've basically maxed out credit cards on, asked your family for money, maybe you did an Indiegogo, and now you have to fulfill all those rewards. And this is the cycle, the release strategy for an indie filmmaker in 2021, basically. It's either that or potentially hit up some, sales reps, hit some distribution, try to get something for your film. But in most cases, unless you have some sort of low budget horror film that targets a very specific niche, you're probably not going to hit a lot of people because no one's going to want to buy like a drama, comedy, or any of those type of films unless that they have a star or someone who's really talented. So what do we do as indie filmmakers to change this? What is the way that we can hijack and reinvent indie filmmaking? Because this method is not working. We cannot worship the heroes of old and try to do the same thing that worked in the 90s. The industry is just different. In the 90s, there was only a few thousand indie films being produced every few years. So there was not as much competition. Now you're having thousands, maybe 20, 30,000 films being produced every 2 or 3 years in the indie film space. So your competition is a lot harder. So we cannot live on the old idea that you're going to make a film and you're going to send it to some big producer and it's going to get seen by a lot of people. We need to look at a new distribution model. What's interesting is that the release strategy is basically there already, which is put your films on YouTube, Vimeo, Tubi from the get-go and not worry about festival fees and trying to hit these big major festivals. This is basically the strategy that I've tried to promote for the last few years, which is basically make films for as cheap as humanly possible. Make them super duper cheap and then put them on free platforms like YouTube and Tubi specifically. If you want to, you can do Vimeo or Amazon. I think these aren't as superior because ultimately, what does free movies promote? Free movies promote gaining an audience, especially on YouTube. I think Tubi is awesome because you probably are making a higher amount of revenue, but I think that the key in order to hack indie filmmaking is building an audience. Think about Tarantino, think about Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith. Why are their films consistently successful? Because they have an audience. They have people that actually like their work and continue to see their work, buy their DVDs and their merch, as well as see them talk at a venue or anything like that. If you can build a community, if you can hack a community, you might be able to make a successful indie film. But there's a few sacrifices you're going to have to make. For me, what I'm doing is I'm releasing all of my feature films entirely for free on YouTube. And that might sound absolutely crazy, but what I've seen is exponential growth. Basically, since the start of 2020 till 2021, I've gained almost 6,000 subscribers because of this platform and how I'm releasing my films. With that, I've seen an exponential amount of people subscribing to my Patreon, YouTube advertisement money, and I've seen an opening and a window for where I could see my content going in the future. If you build up your audience, if you build up a collective of people who enjoy watching your stuff, what's interesting is that you can monetize that through making DVDs, selling your film potentially on Amazon or Vimeo. At some point when you've built up a large enough following, you can make your own website and sell your films. You can put your films on Tubi and then direct your audience towards that and possibly make a higher amount of income. So I think that if you want to make indie film successful, you need to build from the ground up. And this is either making a YouTube platform, a Twitter, Facebook, whatever platform you are most successful at. Try to use that in order to leverage it to make a better indie film release. So for me, that would be making films under $1,000 and making multiple films in 1 year. Because what's different about this platform is that it incentivizes volume. On YouTube and Tubi, the more films you have, the more opportunities you can make money. So instead of trying to make one masterpiece every 3 to 5 years, if you can make 3 films in 1 year, you can build your library up into a point at which you are making more money because you're making more films. And that's what I've been doing right now with my YouTube, and I've seen relatively good success. I've only made my films for a few $1,000s, so I've been able to make the budgets back as well as clear that and make a few $1,000s of profit. Whereas most people will end up spending $20,000 or $30,000 on their debut feature film and then losing $20,000 or $30,000 of that money. I think what's different about this platform is that if you can make cheap and quality work, you can make a huge amount of volume of it. And if you make a huge amount of volume of it, there's a lot more opportunities to make money. And the only qualifications, especially on YouTube, is just getting to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours. And if you're making feature films, that's relatively easy, especially if they're over an hour. One area that I've always seen as a problem is how people promote their movies. They don't really think of it from the ground up. They make a film, then they start a page for that film. And then finally, when that page has accumulated enough people, they'll put a trailer on there. But they never really keep that page going. They start a new page every time they make a new film, and it's really weird to me. I would say build one film page that you're going to post everything on there. Post religiously, post 1 to 3 videos every week, just about your filmmaking journey, your script writing, your filming, your production, your editing, whatever you have to do in order to get people engaged. Keep them engaged. Keep the content coming, and that's where you can monetize a lot of stuff, especially if you get monetization on YouTube. You can monetize your films and you can monetize the behind the scenes content, which if you've built enough audience like I have, that actually ends up being more successful than even the films themselves because you can make that content religiously and quickly. I don't think this is a fix for everyone. There are going to be people who are going to want to do the traditional route. And if you want to go the traditional route of going into Hollywood or going into indie film production on films that are featuring like actual name talent, that's totally fine. But if you want to go the true indie film route, if you want to go and make films that are truly made at an indie level, I think that the best possible way is to work your way up instead of trying to force yourself into the bigger game. There really is no market right now for the indie filmmaker making films trying to hit festivals. It's just a crapshoot. You might possibly get some success with it, you might not, who knows. So if I were you, I would try to build a consistent audience. I would try to put your films out for free in order to engage and build that audience. I would try to monetize that when you have a bigger audience by putting out behind the scenes content and putting those films potentially on Tubi and other platforms that you can make money on. And I would just rinse and repeat, keep at it. I think that most people, their biggest problem is they make one film, they give up, and then they say, oh, Hollywood doesn't want me. Well, I think in most cases, people want you to make films, they just want you to make a volume of them. And if you only make one film, If you only make one film, it's really hard for people to want to help promote and seek out your work, because at some point, if you're a one film artist, they're just going to forget about you. So the best thing to do is make films often, promote them to your audience, and hopefully you'll find some success. I've found some success and I've been able to make back my budget. So hopefully this is a little bit of a case study in what you can do with indie film. Get out there, make films, and hopefully let's keep indie film alive and keep heading forward with making movies in 2021 and 2022. Thanks. Have a good one. Consider subscribing, and peace out.